Let's talk about coding. So, why do I want to make this video? Anyone who has tried to take a step into the big wide world of coding knows that in 2019, there's no shortage of documentation for any language you can think of. The really popular languages, Java, C, Python. The smaller languages, R, Ruby, Perl. I don't even know what those do. You can find no shortage of documentation for any of those languages. But what there seems to be a bit of a lack of is knowledge on how to rigorously self-study those things. Self-studying anything is always going to be a little more difficult or challenging than learning something formally in a classroom for kind of the obvious reasons. You don't take notes, you don't have an expert who's telling you these things, telling you precisely what you need to know and omitting all of the crap that you don't need to know. I thought I would share the process by which I am self-learning programming. Now, I'm not an expert by any means, I'm just getting into this or back into this. I felt like some of these things need to be said in a condensed form because there's just so much information out there that it's kind of hard to know where to start. It could just seem a little bit overwhelming. So right now I'm primarily focusing on Python. I'll move to SQL a little bit later, and I came into Python with just a dabbling of MATLAB, so I know the basic things, what functions are, how to use them very generally speaking, loops, what they are. I haven't used them a whole lot. Data types, whether we're talking about booleans, strings, integers, all of that kind of stuff, like if-else type of statements. That's really all I'm coming into Python knowing. The only real reason I'm choosing Python is because I know that it's extremely popular. It's open source, so it has no shortage of documentation. There's a lot of great devs out there who publish a lot of great information. And because I know that it's in relatively high demand for employers, I don't want to talk a whole lot about specific learning content like tutorials you can find or learn coding in a day or learn coding in an hour. If you're looking for that, all I can say is you can go to python.org's website and you can look at all of the ranked content. I've mainly focused on this book here, Learn Python 3 the Hard Way by Zed Shaw. I think that was a great starting point, but there's obviously more than one way to skin a cat. There's going to be no shortage of grade A content sources beyond that. So these are kind of in order, kind of not in order. I just wrote them down as I thought about them. So the first of which is I started a Github repository. One is so that I have a place other than my computer to store my stuff in case my computer crashes or dies for whatever reason. It shows proof of my work and my relative proficiency for maybe a potential employer in the future. On my resume, I have my Github repository. And also, if I want to start a project with a friend or a colleague or someone else in school for a project like I'm about to do in Maple, that's a relatively easy way to share code with them rather than just, emailing them a .py file or something. On that GitHub, I'll post the final product, the final Python code or script, whatever you want to call it. And in addition to that, I'll usually post my pseudocode, which I usually handwrite for whatever reason. I wouldn't say that pseudocode is necessary per se. I find it to be extremely helpful. I think most people would benefit from writing pseudocode. And if you're not familiar with what pseudocode is, it's just kind of a list of steps that you want your script to take. So rather than writing out the function and the actual syntax, the actual code, you can say something like name this variable and have the contents of this variable be an input that's requested from the user, and this is the actual request that I want to make. So putting things in words rather than the code or the specific syntax for your language. So for my first project, I wanted to pick something that I was already familiar with. So in my case, that's math, algebra in this case. And I wanted it to be really simple. So the project that I ended up with was taking two-dimensional coordinates, or in 2D Cartesian space, and I used the generic distance formula to find the distance between those two things. So I use variables, I request data from the user. That user inputs data. That data is stored in a variable, and then I just do algebraic operations between those variables, and I make the sum of two variables a new variable, on and on and on until it outputs the integer or the value, the distance between those things. So I wanted to start small. One, because it's what I know, and two, because it's kind of nice. It doesn't take too long. That took me, an afternoon to do and debug and all of that stuff. And, it's a nice little bit of motivation. Like, hey, I'm capable of doing this. We have something small. Now we can make something a little bigger that implements more complicated things like APIs or, different modules that you have to import to Python in various ways, because there's no shortage of those. I just didn't want to put the cart before the horse, so to speak. I didn't want to start out with something extremely complicated, and I knew that it would be complicated, and I would get caught up in the weeds, and it would take too long, it would be frustrating, and I would have invested all of this time into it with nothing to show for it. So I want to have something to show for my time, incrementally speaking. And of course, since I'm new to this requires a lot of Googling, a lot of looking up at information, whether that's in books, texts, or primarily online in my case. And I'm not going to remember all of these specific commands or general information that I find, at least not at first, until I've been doing this, probably hundreds of hours, let's be honest. Because right now this is relegated just to my weekends. And if I learn a specific command this Saturday, I'm probably not going to remember it next Saturday. What I'm doing is I'm actually taking notes. And I have a Word document for each individual thing. I have one for Maple. I have one for MATLAB. Or not MATLAB. I have one for Python. I have one for machine learning. And most of them are broken up into two parts. One of them is just general knowledge, like for my Python one, the difference between a text editor and an IDE. What can an IDE do that a text editor can't? Why some things just need a text editor, and why other things, other tasks that you want to accomplish kind of require an IDE, or why they're made a lot easier with an IDE. And the other half of those notes is specific syntax and grammar that I found useful. So if I want to request input from a user and store that in a variable, and the variable with a certain name, well, I can put an example in my notes and say, hey, that's what this is for. And that's really useful. And having it digitally in a Word document rather than like handwriting all of this is that I can, Command F or Control F, and I can look for something in particular and find it relatively easily. And I think just writing all this stuff down in general kind of aids in memorization rather than just reading something. Reading it and writing it, helps it to stick a little bit more. So if I'm not actively studying and I'm in the middle of another class or something else, and I think of a question, I can pull up on my computer and very easily type a question into one of my Word documents if I don't have time to Google it right now. And then I can come back to it, see my question, be like, oh yeah, I remember wondering about that. I can Google my question. If the answer is relevant and or useful, I can add that to my notes. So it's kind of a running list of questions and answers to questions. So I can always keep track of what I figured out, what I need to figure out, and I can go down rabbit holes as I see appropriate or necessary. And a lot of times what I like to do is find a Wikipedia page for something, and I'll right-click all of the hyperlinks and open them in new tabs, to other Wikipedia pages. And I'll just read all the stuff that I find. And I'm not going to remember all of that. Not all of it's going to be useful, but it's going to contribute to a broader, more general understanding of the programming world. Like differences between different languages. What makes one language better for a particular application? What a high-level language is, what a low-level language is, what object-oriented programming is. Just things like that. General knowledge, what it means to parse information. I didn't know what that was until today. Still can't speak well to it. I'm going to have to go back and read it again. But that's, an integral part of this whole process. Because there's a whole lot more to the programming world than just writing a script and hitting run and, whoop-de-doo, getting a number back. Especially if you want to do this for more than just a hobby and for, potentially take it into a job. And if you tell someone you're proficient in Python or C, you want to be proficient in Python or C, otherwise people aren't going to take you seriously, and they're going to realize that your knowledge is really just some facts. So for me, that's really important. I assume it'd be important for other people as well. I would suggest, and I think a lot of other people would suggest as well, is finding some learning resource like this, which has small, just piecemeal lessons interspersed into the reading, so that rather than reading 30 pages on a diverse topic that's got a lot of stuff going on in it, you can say, this is a function, make a function. This is a variable, make a variable equal to this thing, take these two variables and make their sum equal a new variable. Things like that. So that as you read it, you're getting practice and you're putting that information to, fingers on the keyboard. And I think that really helps in understanding, because there's no way I can read this 100+ page book front to back and then go back and remember all of it. I've already had that happen once. I read 20 or 30 pages and then I didn't code for like 2.5, 3 weeks, and then I went back to that 30th page and it said, do this thing in order to do all this other stuff, and I was like, I don't even remember how to do that. So I had to go back to page 1, kind of start over a little bit. So I think it just helps to do the work as you go, no matter how small and minute it is, how simple and straightforward it is, to do it as you're learning it. So generally speaking, what I'm saying is start small, Google questions as they come up, write the answers to those questions down in somewhere that's going to be easy to access later. And in addition to those small things, and let those questions lead to other questions, and let the answers to those questions lead to other questions. So you can just kind of, slowly start spreading out your knowledge and getting a better grasp of the whole world, rather than just problem solving your script that you have and getting it to run. And that's great, but that's not, at the end of the day, you want to understand the whole language and how you utilize that language and how that language interacts with your computer and all of this other stuff. Taking it step by step and trying to be as formal and as rigorous as possible, I think makes all the difference in the world. Because you can watch one of these tutorials, like one of them, I'm not trying to hate on them, but Giraffe Academy has an 8 or 10 hour introductory course to Python. And one of the first things they have you do is, all right, go and install Python if you don't already have it, and now go install this IDE called Pycharm. And Pycharm's what I use. I think it's great. It's way more powerful than I need right now, but it works. I have a working knowledge of it. But what they don't tell you is Pycharm is an IDE, an integrated development environment. This is what an IDE is. This is how it differs from a text editor. So starting from the absolute fundamentals is, I think, really beneficial, and working your way up from there. And that's why I swear he didn't pay me to talk about this, but that's why I think this book was really helpful. It starts from the absolute beginning, running Python from the terminal on your computer. So I hope this was, somewhat beneficial, interesting, but otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.